Rachel, who is our Director General, and she just wants to say a few words of welcome for you this morning. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, participants, on behalf of the English-Speaking Union, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the international headquarters of the English-Speaking Union, Dartmouth House. It is very, very special for us to have all of you here from so many different parts of the world participating in the international final of the public speaking competition for schools 1995. I'll tell you briefly the history of this particular competition. 15 years ago, we were asked by our president, the Duke of Edinburgh, to consider extending our national competition, which is our national public speaking competition for schools, which is run throughout England and Wales, and to incorporate a winner from the plain speaking competition in Australia, which actually was run under the Brit-Australia Society or the Australia-Brit Society. Now, we have a totally different format for our national final with our schools in England, and that is a team that actually is presented where you have a chairman, a speaker, and a proposer, the vote of thanks. So it really was impossible to incorporate this particular winner into our national final. But it gave us this wonderful idea of turning it into an international final. Now, in those days, the ESU had not become such a global organization as it is today, and therefore we invited the winner of the ESU national final. We asked the American School in London to send a speaker to participate in the international final. We were well supported by a team from our ESU in Belgium, in Brussels, who were doing sterling work, and we invited also a winner from a school in Canada. Now, this was the beginning of it, and it proved to be so successful that it gradually began to grow. Now, today, we have got 32 participants from 16 different countries, and most of those countries have got an English-speaking union, and one or two are now thinking of steering a committee, so we will be launching very shortly in that particular country. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank all the participants for coming from so far afield to be here today, to thank the teachers who've supported you and your friends who are also here. In addition, I'd also like to thank the judges who have given up their valuable time to take on this onerous task of judging this competition. And in addition to that, I would like to thank Dean Newman and her team, and in particular Ed Brasher, who has just joined the English-Speaking Union as our International Development Officer and has done such fantastic work in getting this program together, and also to Justine Davidson, who has always been such a tower of strength, and Mark Batten, who I know in the background has helped enormously as our assistant in the youth department. By being a member of the English-Speaking Union, we all have a very important part to play, and that is to help to pave the way through friendship and understanding into tomorrow's world. Thank you all very much indeed.
Right, our next speaker this afternoon is Ms. Muniza Zaidi from Pakistan. Speak on the exploitation of the female sex through advertising.
Advertisements form a very large sector of our society, deeply integrated into our lives. And now, since the development in telecommunications, their impact has become global. Advertisers use the method of subliminal perception, in which images are incorporated within a picture that attack the consumer's subconscious mind. Cigarette advertisements are an example of the social conditioning that is possible through advertising. Many smokers admit being drawn towards smoking because of the Marlboro Man image that was projected. Thus, it becomes infinitely more important for us to monitor what is projected as ads and how it is projected. Now, females have proven to be the more effective sex when it comes to promoting a product, shown by the difference in pay scales between male and female models, women being paid higher than men. Maybe it's because women are more aesthetically pleasing than men. But whatever the reason, it is not good enough to warrant the degradation of the female form in intelligence. Women are striving very hard to achieve the same status as men. But along with that right to freedom, they have the right to respect. And the way some advertisements portray them is downright derogatory. Women will be cast in roles of subjugation. She is the smiling catering secretary, air hostess, or maybe even telephone operator. But she is seldom seen in roles of command and control. And it is this role casting that ingrains in the minds of its audience the impression that women are of secondary importance, that their sole goal is to cater to the whims and desires of the seemingly superior male. Ladies and gentlemen, this is exactly the social conditioning the women's liberation movement has been protesting against and trying to eradicate. For it limits the sphere of action of the female to tasks of relatively low-level intelligence. Encouraging chauvinism and scorn for the female IQ are ads by tobacco companies. They show a woman running to the beck and call of a man just because he is a huge success. Is this not furthering and reinforcing the opinion that all women are bimbos? We've come a long way since the time when women were objects of servility. Then why are they still being portrayed as such? What is even more objectionable is the way the female form is exploited. Her physical aspect is enhanced, taking center stage, whereas her more valuable qualities are thrown backstage. She is scantily dressed, whereas most men usually contrive to stay fully dressed. Ladies and gentlemen, when there is no need for a display of flesh, why is there a display? Perfume advertisements in magazines often show nude women, or almost so, but it's very difficult for one to make the connection between nudity and smelling nice. Car magazine advertisements are not much different, with voluptuous women adorning the car. To what purpose? Women are being used as bait. They are not up for sale, and this translation of their physical qualities in monetary terms is humiliating. There was a huge uproar in Sweden last year over the same issue of indecent exposure. There was an underwear advertisement which showed a woman in provocative positions. The Swedish women were so outraged that they took to the streets and smashed shop windows to make their point. The Swedes now have a law that prohibits the display of such advertisements. Ladies and gentlemen, nudity in itself is not the problem, but its implications are. This blatant exhibition of the female anatomy makes it public property, inviting crude comments and making the female an object of bandyment. The younger generation of females are suffering from complexes and severe depression, and then compare themselves to the well-proportioned figures of the women in these advertisements and become acutely conscious of their own shortcomings. This has led to great instability in this generation. The message, ladies and gentlemen, these ads tend to give emphasize the physical aspect of a woman over her intrinsic value. There are more dimensions to a woman than the purely sexual one. But what comes across as the number one priority is bodily beauty. And this is where priorities get mixed up and a wrong image is projected to the susceptible society. It is time we stopped this silent persecution, ladies and gentlemen, and took a step against all advertisements that are an accessory. Thank you.
Any questions, please, for Muniza?
Yes, I think they were, because no one took a step against that. They smashed the windows of the shops that displayed those advertisements. Let me make that clear. And they were justified at the time it took a step up because it was portion of movement against the women's liberation, in fact, that has been ignored largely. The fact that such advertisements are still turned out, this shows how much the women's liberation movement has succeeded. We have not succeeded at all. We are still pandering to the male in this male-dominated society.
Yeah, did you say that the same thing happens to male models? The image of a male man in advertising is as much exploited as the women?
I agree with that, but not as much as the female. I mean, how many underwear advertisements do you know in which the male is in provocative positions? Okay, if they are in provocative positions, the image that is projected is that you can't get me. When if you see women in advertisements, it's, you can get me. If you buy this, you get me too. That's what's wrong.
Okay, time for one more.
Frequently in women's magazines there are adverts which advertise products which are sold solely for women, and yet these depict the naked female form. Why are women still buying these things if it is so effectively?
If this is in nudity, I mean something that's, when I mean that they're being exploited, I mean that they're not being, the image that's being projected is wrong. If it is an underwear advertisement, they will be nude, but do they have to be provocative?
Okay, thank you very much. Right, the next speaker we have this afternoon is Mr. Christopher Hurrell from Australia, whose speech is entitled Education is the Key.
Ladies and gentlemen, ignorance is a delicate, exotic fruit. Touch it and the bloom is gone. The whole theory of modern education is radically unsound. Fortunately, though, in England, at any rate, education produces no effect whatsoever. It's all right, I haven't gone mad. That's Oscar Wilde talking, not Christopher Hurrell. And surely Oscar was being not only exaggerating, but also, in today's terms, slightly out of date. Or is there a grain of truth in what he says, even for today's modern education system? In 1989, the General Assembly of the United Nations adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Articles 28 and 29 of this convention recognise the importance of high-quality education for all children. Not only in Article 28 does this convention state that all 3 levels of education must be available and accessible to all children, but also in Article 29 it states the aims of education, and amongst others says that one of these must be to prepare the child for responsible adulthood with respect for national and cultural identity and values and fundamental freedoms, and in the spirit of understanding, tolerance and friendship among all people, ethnic, national and cultural groups. In short, what the Convention states is that education must not only develop the child academically, but it must do more. It must combat ignorance in the child. And this is where modern education appears to be failing. Because ignorance is not dead, far from it, even amongst the young people who are still being educated at the moment. And the consequences of ignorance are in fact ever prevalent in our international community. For from ignorance, principally, grows fear of the unknown. Now this takes a passive manifestation in an apathy which leads to the slowing of development to the point of stagnation in society. Now in Australia, this has been most obvious politically, for it is a sad reality in my country that the people of Australia do not understand the principles by which their democratic nation operates. Their constitution, the document which embodies these principles, is foreign to most of the people who live by its guidelines. In fact, a survey in 1987 showed that only just over half of the people of Australia even knew of the existence of this document, let alone what it contains. But what is the result of this ignorance? The result has been a complete lack of constitutional reform and development in the 100 years since the document's inception. Our Australian government is ordered by a 19th century doctrine, almost without change, and it has been allowed to fall steadily further and further out of date. Despite this fact, a fact which incidentally both sides of politics recognise in Australia, Australians recoil from changing the document because, rightly, they fear tampering with something about which they know nothing. However, there are also active and aggressive consequences of the fear which is born from ignorance. This obviously less desirable outcome is simply prejudice. Even in our enlightened society today, people still suffer from prejudice because of the colour of their skin, their religious or cultural background, their sex or sexuality. Now, if education was meeting its responsibilities in the instruction of understanding and tolerance, would there be still today racial hatred and stemming from that racial vilification, which is to be dealt with in minorities in our country? If education counselled freedom and equality successfully, would there not be complete acceptance of the role women play in all countries in our international community, as equal players in the development of that society? And similarly, would there not be acceptance completely of sexuality as a matter of free choice, without deserving of prejudice? And in fact, this situation shows no sign of improving. Because in the schoolyard today, one of the most damning taunts to be directed at anyone is that of a reference to their sexual preference and being treated as such. In fact, in this sense, young people are the worst offenders. And as the schoolyard surely is a microcosm of tomorrow's society, this does not augur well. Such injustices as these, caused by the human fear of that which is different, can only be banished in one way, and that is the slow, sometimes painful process of education. Education which is available and accessible to all children, regardless of the ability of their parents to participate in that education, either financially or educationally. An education which does more than teach literacy and numeracy, does more than educate the child academically, but educate the whole child so that they may play a responsible role in society. So while ignorance may be, for some, the delicate exotic fruit, it must be for us, to quote a very different writer, William Henry Beveridge, the economist, an evil weed, and which governments must seek to eradicate. And if the bloom is truly gone with a single touch, then it must be the game of all governments and of all of us to reach out against it now, and with the nourishment of education, let grow in its place the flowers of knowledge, tolerance, and understanding.
You allow subjects such as Greek and Latin, not entirely relevant, not entirely vocational, to survive in educational syllabus and for next to learn.
The good arguments to say that it's a shame that such languages and cultures are being lost because they're no longer immediately relevant. But it's possible that we may just have to accept this as part of the development of the human race. And certainly, if education in such pursuits was going to take the place of education such as that which I've described today, then I would say certainly that which is more relevant to developing our society now, not that of 1,000 years ago, is more important.
Chairman, does the speaker believe that a little knowledge is a dangerous thing?
I think perhaps a little knowledge should be replaced by a lot of knowledge. I think perhaps no knowledge is a more dangerous thing.
Our first speaker in the final, who is Mr. Ashwin Ramasubramaniam from India. Sorry, yes. His topic is the relevance of Indian philosophy to modern civilization.
Respected judges, ladies and gentlemen, I come from India, the land of sages and philosophers, the land where religions of the Orient as well as the Occident have coexisted and flourished for centuries on end. Hence, it pains me tremendously to see the violence, the intolerance, and the bigotry perpetrated in the name of religion. Let me quote Swami Vivekananda, a great Indian philosopher. He says, sectarianism, bigotry, and its horrible descendant, fanaticism, have long possessed this beautiful earth. They have filled it with violence, drenched it often and often with human blood, destroyed civilizations, and sent whole nations to despair. Had it not been for these horrible demons, human society would be far more advanced than it is today. These words were spoken by him in 1893, more than 100 years ago, at the World Parliament of Religions, Chicago, and they remain as, if not more relevant today than they were then. Man today has become increasingly materialistic. Our wants are grossly disproportionate to our needs, and to satisfy our greed, we stop at nothing. We have brought upon ourselves greater stress and tension. Basic social institutions like those of marriage and family are collapsing. Man, in his helplessness, seeks solace. He seeks an emotional and spiritual anchor in religion. Unfortunately, many gullible men are falling into the clutches of so-called gurus and mavericks who claim to provide shortcuts to salvation. The need of the world today is human unity, and religions as of today are proving to be great obstacles. They have departed from their original purity and degenerated into arrogant sects. Where then lies the solution to these ills that plague our society? Indian philosophers, in their detailed study of religions, have attempted to bring about a synthesis of all religions, to pick out the good from each religion, to eliminate the chaff from the wheat. The basic teaching of all religions is the same, that God is one. He is the creator of this entire universe, man being only a small part of it. He is omniscient, omnipresent, and omnipotent. Where then is there room for any individual to proclaim his God as the only God, or his religion superior to another's? God is not a copyright or a patent of any particular religion or school of thought. It is said by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, the sacred Hindu scriptures, "Whosoever comes to me in whatsoever form, I reach him." All men are struggling along paths which in the end lead to me. The question now arises, how are religions of any relevance in the day-to-day life of the ordinary man? Well, religions, in addition to lofty spiritual ideas, also come down to the level of the ordinary man. They prescribe a way of life. They prescribe a set of ideals for man to regulate himself, and for society too to regulate itself. However, the rationalist may rebel at the idea of accepting a code of life centuries old being imposed upon him. But a little deeper thought will reveal the necessity for such a code of life, a code of conduct. Of course, certain ideas like penance or asceticism may no longer be relevant in our modern age. Yet, basic teachings like those of the Ten Commandments, to cite an example, are ageless and immortal. They are valid for every century and for every era. This is where religions become socially relevant, in an attempt to create a good and principled society in which all men can live in peace and harmony. To conclude then, the world has seen enough bloodshed and violence in the name of religion. It is up to us to save our future generations from the same fate. Let us work towards universal brotherhood, love, and understanding. Let us accept each individual's right to belief and deride none. Let us develop the greatness of heart like Voltaire to say, "I disapprove of what you say, but defend to the death your right to say it. Philosophers and religious thinkers have blazed a trail for us to follow. To quote Longfellow, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Let every man then try to imbibe these religious ideals and morals and make this world a better place for the future generations. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask the Speaker what the essence of Indian philosophy is as you try to give us today?
Essence of Indian philosophy is tolerance, to put it in one word. We accept every individual's we accept every individual's viewpoint, and we do not deride anybody. We do not say, because you belong to this particular religion, I look down upon you. No, everyone is equal. That is the essence of Indian philosophy.
What is your position regarding the atheist?
Well, of course, religions do not apply to an atheist, but anyway, to an atheist, I would say, accept what the religions tell you. Not because they were the words of a god or because they were the words of some prophet. Accept it as the words of an enlightened man, if you will. He knew what society requires, and therefore he preached those ideals, and therefore they are relevant. Take, for example, the 10 Commandments. Imagine what chaos there would be in society if every man was a murderer, if every man was an adulterer, if every man started stealing. Well, our logic and our rationale tells us to accept these. So I have to tell an atheist, accept them because you think they are rational.
Okay.
Start with our first speaker, who is going to be Michael Capaldo from the Netherlands, and he is going to be speaking on Mondrian, genius or idiot. Michael.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The question I'm going to ask myself and you, the audience, is Mondrian, idiot or genius? As you might or might not know, this year is the Mondrian year because the man Mondrian died 50 years ago. In the following 5 minutes or so, I would like to tell you something about this painter. You might think it foolish of me to speak about the work of a visual artist, but as it happens, it is not so hard to me to explain you exactly what his most famous works look like. Take a canvas painted white, add some black horizontal and vertical lines, and in the rectangles you have just created, you put the primary colors, red, yellow and blue. And there you have a masterpiece, almost as famous as the works of Rembrandt or Van Gogh. But is this a masterpiece? Is this a work of art even? To some, it looks more like a t-shirt design. Where is the artistic fantasy? How on earth can such a lot of people love a seemingly sterile composition like that so much? This year, people from all over the world will come to the Netherlands to see the work of this man who said he had denounced abstract art and created his own new form of art called neoplasticism. Mondrian started out as the son of a teacher. He wanted very much to free himself from his bourgeois background. In a way, he did this by becoming a painter, but he wanted more. In the beginning, he too painted the usual houses, lighthouses, trees and dunes. But as I said, he went further. He wanted to capture the essential part of the visual world he saw around him. He wanted to achieve this by throwing out all the non-elementary parts of this visual world he saw around him. He kept on throwing out all of these elements until he ended up with just the elements of the black horizontal and vertical lines, the primary colors, and the color white. When he had these elements, he then started to experiment, intending to find the perfect equilibrium of form and color. This equilibrium was by no means just a visual equilibrium. To him, it was also very much a mental equilibrium. He said he wanted to create art in spite of the artist. Art in spite of the artist, you might ask? What if Mondrian had a computer and a printer? He could have simply moved around the elements of his composition with the flick of a button. It would have saved him lots of hours of painstaking painting, repainting, over and over again. But I think Mondrian would not have liked a computer and a printer at all. After all, he was an idealist. During World War II, he wrote, "If we cannot free ourselves, we can at least free our vision." It is exactly that what I see in his work. I see the struggle of a man to capture the essence of life in a work of art. Our age is the age of the great information garbage bin thrown over us every day, again, and again. That's why, to me, Mondrian's work is important and even beautiful. In his work, we see that all the garbage has been thrown away. Everything that is left is essential. What is left really is purity. What is left are the things Mondrian thought were important in life. If we could all figure that out for ourselves, we might not be famous painters, but we would at least be one step further. Thank you.
The second speaker this morning is from Argentina. Javier Calhas is going to speak to us about the bland man.
Coke without caffeine, beer without alcohol, butter without fat, sugar without glucose, man without flavor, man without substance. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to a new species, the bland man. A man nearly empty inside, hollow, light. A man who is terribly indifferent, who gets hold of nothing that isn't money, power, success, sex, narcissism, or basically having a good old time. This new species, the bland man, proliferates in modern society. There he is, walking in the city, having a deep relationship with his mobile phone. Here he is, poring over his newspaper, ignoring his companions. It's sell now or regret later. Ground coffee, gleaming percolator, sound of gurgling and hissing, and a great cup of coffee. But not for the bland man. It's instant, it's easy, it's modern. The bland man is a hedonist, centered in pleasure and in enjoying life at any price. The bland man is a great consumer. The essential is to have, not to be. The bland man is permissive. There are no prohibitions, no restricted areas. He is a relativist. Any analysis can be good and bad. It can be positive and negative. The bland man will always say, why not? But we should not criticize him. We should feel sympathetic towards him. He is the result of a decadent society. Now, I'm no prude. I'm a man who believes in dynamism. But modernity, for modernity's sake? Have we ignored the soul of man and replaced it with materialism? Is Stoicism a bad word and hedonism the new god? And have the great sayings and dicta of the world been replaced by the ubiquitous motto, I shop, therefore I am. The blind man experiences a constant feeling of emptiness because while having nearly everything, he is unhappy. Why? Well, simply because what gives happiness is having a coherent life with solid arguments, calling love, work, and culture by their real names, and not calling sex, love, the neurotic and maniacal pursuit of professionalism, work, and reading newspapers, magazines, watching television, culture. I contrast with the bland man, the solid man, a man with a direction in life, a man who is constantly wanting to transcend, to progress, but not a material progress, instead a spiritual enrichment which will make him a better person. I would agree with Aristotle when he encourages us to imitate the good man, the virtuous man, a man with definite codes of conduct, with a clear orientation of where to head. Can I say Mahatma Gandhi, the Dalai Lama, Martin Luther King, Audrey Hepburn? Okay, maybe I'm a dreamer, and like Kubla Khan, would like to inhabit a Xanadu, a stately pleasure dome, along with my collection of aforementioned philanthropes. But you see, I just can't believe that mankind is destined to become like salt, which once it has lost its flavor, its substance, it becomes useless, good for nothing. So, I have no solutions, I'm sorry to say, but I am going to write a letter to Brigitte Bardot and warn her that there should be another species put on her risk of extinction list, and plead with her not to allow this other hybrid mongrel new species, Homo blandensis, to proliferate at the cost of its nobler but more fragile cousin, Homo sapiens. And until I hear from her, I'm going to be on a watchful lookout for the woman who created an evening dress for a night out at the Oscars made entirely from expired gold American Express cards. And you thought I was joking when I said, I shop, therefore I am.
Our next speaker, speaking on the subject, the mother-child, is Suzanne Bühler from Denmark.
Good morning. I hope you're all doing very, very well. I'd like you to do me a favor. I'd like for you to think back about 2 or 3 days ago when you first got here and you were walking down the street and enjoying the weather and looking in the shops, and you saw a baby, a cute little baby that the girls love and say, oh, he's so cute, and everyone goes nuts about, and a little baby stroller. And think about how proud you are of this little baby and how wonderful and sweet you thought he looked. And then think that it's possible that this baby has a mother that could be 13 years old. In America, there are unbelievably many pregnant young teenage girls. In a high school, out of 500 students, there's 1 out of 50 girls that are pregnant. Our age, younger than our age, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds with babies. Out of these, half of these girls that get pregnant, they have abortions. Abortions. They're killing a life that was growing inside of them. 2/3 of these abortions are illegal abortions. And this really scares me. How? How can so many young girls become pregnant? I'll tell you how. I'll tell you first, the biggest problem in the States is the American mentality. American mentality is closed. People are afraid to educate kids on using a condom, on using prevention, on doing things. The only thing they tell their young daughters and sons are abstain. Children aren't going to abstain. If they feel like having sexual intercourse, they're going to do it. But they should be given the chance to know they should use condoms, they can use birth control. They should know that if you're going to have sex with someone, you can have a baby. I don't care if you're 13, I don't care if you're 12, I don't care if you're 16. You can still have a baby. There's another big problem is the school education. The British people are thought of as being conservative, perhaps. But in real life, the Americans are maybe worse. How many schools in America talk about condoms? How many places in America can you say the word sex without a kid laughing, without somebody snickering, without somebody becoming shy? Nowhere. There are no schools that tell their students, listen to me, if you're going to have sexual intercourse, use a condom, please use a condom, please take a pill, please do something. No, the kids don't know. They get pregnant. There's 13-year-old girls running around with babies in their arms, and why? Because they are not educated. They're not educated by their parents, they're not educated by the school, and Catholics. I'm not attacking Catholics at all, but the religion tells children, do not use condoms, do not have abortions. If you're 12 years old and you have a baby, oh, I'm terribly sorry, but you're going to have to keep it and you're going to have to live with it the rest of your life. You can be 12 years old. You're still a kid if you're 12 years old. You're still a kid if you're 13 years old. And you can have a baby that you're going to have to live with for your entire life. Can this be stopped? Can all of these young teenage pregnancies in the world, can they be stopped? Is there anything to do about it? Of course there is. Schools can begin educating. They can begin running health courses that are obligatory health courses where they teach people, where they have a banana and they show you, this is how you put a condom on. Or they tell kids, of course you can abstain, but you can also take the pill. They tell kids what can happen when you have a baby. They tell kids, if you're going to have sex, you can get pregnant. You need to be careful. Everyone needs to know this. Is it fair that 13, 12, 14, 15-year-olds are going out and having sex? Perhaps some of them don't even know they can get pregnant afterwards. Perhaps some of them don't even know what a condom is. Is it fair? No, it's not fair. Imagine if you got pregnant. Imagine how these people feel. They have no chance for education because the American mentality is so closed around this subject. The kids don't know. That's not fair at all. And the parents, what about the parents? It's difficult to change the mentality of people that have been many generations through and that think in one way. But is it so hard for a father or a mother to tell their daughter, you can get pregnant, please use a condom, please take the pill, please take care of yourself? If you love someone, shouldn't you take care of them in that way? Is it not extremely selfish of the parent not to tell the kids something that they had to find out when they were young? Imagine how much it could help if one mother could say to her children one time, please use a condom. It can't be that difficult. And so what? Why do we need to tell these people, use a condom, please, don't get an abortion, don't get pregnant, please use a pill? What can happen if we don't stop? I'll tell you what can happen. Illegal abortions. Have you ever seen an illegal abortion? Do you know that some girls, 12, 13-year-olds, lay down on the street and get a coat hanger stuck inside of them and scraped around on the inside? Do you know that this happens? And could you imagine it happening to you? That's what can happen. That's one big thing that can happen. It happens very much in the States. There's extremely many illegal abortions. And even if they're not illegal, you are still killing a life. You're killing a baby. Imagine if any of us had been aborted, we wouldn't be here. What about people that have babies? I'll tell you one thing. It ruins the lives of the young children. It ruins the lives of their parents. Children are thrown out onto the streets because they are not wanted. Teenage pregnancy is a very, very scary thing. I know it scares the young teenage mothers. I know it scares their children. And if you have a teenage daughter, it should really scare you. Thank you.
Our next speaker, Angela Pyers, is going to speak to us about her home country. Her speech is entitled Paradoxical Portugal.
Paradoxical Portugal. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is truly an honor to represent Portugal, a nation that opened new horizons to the world. As the patriotic person that I am, I cannot hesitate to dedicate the brief 285 seconds that will follow to the exaltation of Portugal. But first, I must praise the exemplary 600-year-old annual Portuguese Alliance, as otherwise I would not be here this morning. Long live this alliance, almost as old as the Acropolis, stronger than our needs, of a nobility higher than the Eiffel Tower. And long live port wine, of course. The setting for my public tribute to Portugal could not be more appropriate. At the sight of such a diversity of nationalities, I can exclaim, it's a big world after all. It's getting smaller all the time. Magellan knew it. Vasco da Gama knew it too. But that was in a glorious past. A past that every good Portuguese person must cherish and remember with the utmost pride and dignity. This ritual is as much part of our identity and our daily lives as the 365 different ways of cooking dried codfish, our typical dish, Although, given the outcome of the recent cod war, it seems we'll be having to do a bit less fishing and perhaps settle for 52 waves, at the very most, one for each Sunday lunch. And it is very sad, but in fact, after some meditation, we arrive at the happy conclusion that A, small is beautiful, and B, the smaller, the better. In other words, anything which makes the world smaller and makes nations more similar to each other is beautiful. Being Portuguese is beautiful, and being European is equally beautiful. But the more European, the better. In sum, the EU is one small, happy family. And as a Portuguese citizen interested in the well-being of her nation, I have a proposition to make. I feel that Portugal is still a bit unprepared for an even more united Europe. Therefore, I propose a plan to develop certain aspects of Portugal that are perhaps not quite up to the EU standards. I have called it Europeanization, or, in simpler terms, a process by which a bad apple becomes fit to wear a European Union label on its glossy skin. The name of the plan is Europeanizing, or EP for short, and it will focus on the social integration of individuals who are potentially European, but are still EP to the EU. Of course, this will require a profound change in our philosophy and identity, but it might not even be that hard. Remember, small is beautiful. For example, why not offer the frustrated shepherd who insists on getting his goats to the other side of the new motorway a clean, white, 100% EU t-shirt bearing the caption, "I'm European," in blue and yellow? You see, not only would this help solve part of our traffic problems, but also our ecological ones, as he would no longer have to wear his same typical black shirt, already permeated with 5 to 6 days of bodily fluids. And it's extremely simple. If we all do our bit and join in the EP effort, the EU family will be preserved forever. What if the plan fails? Who knows, a good alternative would be the creation of a Greenpeace-type movement, with, of course, an equally interesting name, to which we could display our tradition in human values. And my proposal to Portuguese people worldwide is this: let's impose peace in Africa. After all, we're all a bit responsible, and we shall not let the name of Portugal be forgotten. And I'm sure we have this vocation. Anyway, as one of my teachers used to say, Africa's just round the corner. And it's also been said that the equator line has been rising northward at an incredible speed, which of course only adds to the feasibility of the mission. Will we do it this time? Will we need a new government? Who knows, a new prime minister? A new president? But who? It's as clear as mud. But we still have the unquestionable Anglo-Portuguese alliance. After all, port wine is always thicker than most EU drinks. And who knows, maybe another ultimatum could help us invert the situation and this time advance towards monarchy. Our heir to the throne is prepared. Even got married last Saturday, possibly inspired by our Spanish neighbors. You never know. We might even be able to pursue our African dream after all and recover the glory that we once had. Paradoxical or not, the paradox is positive.
The next speaker is from Poland. Adam Ludwikowski is going to speak about human ambitions.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. At the beginning, I'd like to say that ambition is a very difficult concept to explain. As described in the dictionary, it means some kind of aim, aspiration, or desire for advancement or distinction. But what intrigues me most are the two aspects of human ambition, the constructive and the destructive one. Ambitions make us competitive. It's a positive feature, because without it, there wouldn't be any progress in any area of life. but we have to pay attention to not becoming too competitive. In the race for glory and fame, one can hurt people who love him or her. And finally, when you're at the top where you've always wanted to be, it suddenly turns out that you're completely alone there. There's only enough space for one person, and it's you. So why aren't you happy? Is it worth it to be the best and alone? We have to remember that, like drugs, ambition is easy to overdose on. But on the other hand, without it, people break down and achieve nothing. So we have to progress mentally, not only to prove that we are better than others. Religions all over the world have the primary ambition to make humanity better. Jesus, Buddha, Mohammed, they all preached with the same purpose of changing people's lives for the better. Therefore, their ambition was positive. But there is one thing that needs to be kept under control. Two ambitious believers want their religion to be the best and the only true one. They lead religious wars to prove it. Thousands of casualties make it the destructive thing. Thanks to the desire to extend frontiers of, thanks to the desire to improve things that seemed impossible to improve, and the desire to extend frontiers of knowledge and abilities, mankind has gone forward. Medicine, art, literature, science, philosophy, they all have progressed through human ambition. There were many ambitious people whose discoveries were and are very important. For instance, Isaac Newton. Of course, aim doesn't justify means, so we have to be careful that the progress isn't destroying nature, causing unemployment, or in any other way harming the world we live in. However, there are some things difficult to evaluate. Let's have a closer look at the boss of a big car factory. He wants his cars to be more durable and so cheap that the average man can afford them. Who can deny that his ambition is good? We can only wish him good luck. So, he fulfills his ambition. He installs industrial robots in a factory. They're cheaper, better, and more effective than people. The quality of cars increases, and the price goes down. Then, he fires a whole army of designers, constructors, and workers. All of them have rather negative feelings to the machines, which have deprived them of their jobs. Other people are happy, because they can have cheaper cars. Is it good or bad? Can we judge it in an objective way? Can ambitions be good or bad for everybody? In some cases, there can't be good or bad ambition for everybody. In global terms, I mean. But for a small group of people or even one man, there can be. Sometimes the only way we can evaluate it is in a subjective way. It's not good if you spend too much time on fulfilling your ambitions. But if you watch yourself and don't lose your sense of humor, I don't see anything wrong in being ambitious. In fact, there is one major obstacle. It always takes a lot of work to be such a person. Thank you.
Afternoon is Miss Sophie Ennion from Scotland, whose speech is on egalitarianism.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Haven't we come far, ladies? X years ago, I would not be here. None of the women would be. We would be tucked away in some little corner doing crochet work or hemming sheets, living out lives of submission instead of the lives of education and value we now live. And as we climb our way into the boardrooms of corporate giants, as we slowly but surely take over the running of schools, shops, offices and factories, We can leave all men behind, condemn them to a life of drudgery, and show them that sometimes it's hard to be a woman. Hardly a rational view, is it? But still it is one which many people hold. That is why in this speech I would like to change your ideas. The audience here this afternoon is presumably made up of two types of people, feminists and non-feminists. By the end of my speech, I hope that you will all be egalitarianists, supporters of equality between the sexes. To find out why we have such a thing as feminism and why we need such a thing as egalitarianism, we must look back to a time when neither existed. A time when men were men and women were either bored or overworked, depending on how rich their husbands were. The time of the male chauvinist, the mid-Victorian era. However, it was at this time when things seemed darkest for women that the first tiny chinks of light began to appear. There were stirrings in suburbia, drama in the drawing room, mummy was mutineering. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, the worm was slowly starting to turn. The ruling classes, men that is, tried to suppress these whispers of revolution by keeping the little woman firmly in her place, a practice to which Queen Victoria herself added respectability by renouncing the rights of women. But the women who demanded change were determined, and by the end of last century, the feminist movement was well and truly born. From then on, things just got better and better. Women gained the right to vote in stages in 1918 and 1928. The 60s saw equal opportunities in the workplace, and it was feminist writers such as Germaine Greer and Margaret Atwood who began the long task of freeing the hearts and minds of a generation. And so here we all are, in the 90s. Men and women have equal opportunities in the workplace and equal social and political opportunities, and yet our society is far from being egalitarian. Feminists are still there, and some, the lunatic fringe, are still hell-bent on creating an all-female utopia with men kept in cages for breeding purposes only. These ideas are on the increase, and if we keep going on the way we are, this is the kind of world we could be living in 100 years hence. A world where women become men and men become slaves. After all, it is one thing to burn your bra, but quite another to burn all men. Ladies and gentlemen, let us examine the consequences of a society where women become men in order to succeed and ultimately rule. The characteristics of such a society would be, in fact, the worst excesses of male characteristics. For example, ruthlessness, toughness, insensitivity and laziness, rather than what women have and should offer: openness, compassion, sensitivity and tenderness. Ladies and gentlemen, it is the task of our generation to steer a safe course between the Scylla of male chauvinism and the Charybdis of feminist extremism. The aim now should be egalitarianism, absolute equality of treatment and opportunity between the sexes. In an egalitarian society, the distinctions between men and women will lessen, and society will draw the best elements from these roles. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Madam Chairman, it would seem that we have, according to Hegelian theory, a dialectical movement. Thesis: male chauvinism. Antithesis: extreme feminism. The only way forward: synthesis, a blending of these two ideas, is egalitarianism. Ladies and gentlemen, it is up to us to mend this rift and bring a little bit of truth, justice and mutual respect into this world. Let us not be known as Generation X. We must be Generation E. E for egalitarianism. So down with extremism and long live equality.
What do you think of the idea that in certain jobs women have to have better chances at getting it because they had fewer in the past?
I do think that we should positively discriminate in favour of women merely because they had a rough deal in the past. If we do that, we'll merely go swinging back to a society where men are the people that are negatively discriminated against and have to stay at home and wear high-heeled shoes. Therefore, I think that we should be absolutely
absolutely fair and give men and women jobs according to their merits and not according to their sex.
But then what is your opinion on the policy of affirmative action followed by the Americans for the blacks? The blacks believe that it is a positive policy towards an egalitarian society, positive discrimination. So wouldn't you agree that this should also be implemented for women?
No, I do not think so. If, for example, we decided to remedy the past situation by having, say, 6 months where women were better than men, do you think that the women would be pleased after the 6 months to renounce their superior status and become equal again? I do not think so. I think that we must be absolutely and utterly fair and forgive men for their past misdemeanors.
Okay, one more.
Tell me, why don't you think that feminism has now gone so far that in fact it should be positive discrimination for men?
I do not think that in the greater picture of society that feminism is taking such hold that we must positively discriminate in favour of men. The problem is that there are certain fringe groups out there who really do want to propose a sort of woman town in the future. Therefore, what we must do is we must be absolutely fair. That's the only answer. Rationalism. We must be rational.
Our next speaker is Wana Naumaya, and she is from Romania and will be speaking on the subject of Desperate SOS, Our Environment.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will begin by saying that a good speech has to be like a skirt, short enough to be interesting and long enough to cover the subject. Yet, my speech deals with a very serious problem, our environment. We all know that after walking a street, we are still tired. This is due to the noise in the streets, the smoke in the air, the heat and dust and so on. Now, let's have a closer look. There is more and more smoke in the air. The rivers are more and more polluted. The forests are widely deforested, and many species of birds and animals are endangered ones. These are the effects of what we call pollution. These effects were estimated by scientists about 10 or 15 years ago, but nobody paid enough attention to them. Now men, women, children are condemned to suffering. I have recently read in an article that smoke from steel mills in Indiana mixes with moisture in the air and falls as acid rain, killing trees and polluting rivers. You may say Indiana is far away from here, and you may be right, but pollution is the world's worst enemy, not only Britain's or Romania's. In this regard, Britain is introducing a system of integrated pollution control, which means that releases to air, land and water from the most harmful processes will be controlled by this regime. It is therefore important that one country's response to the environmental challenge should address global as well as local problems. It is also essential that different countries should work together for the good of all. I know there are many environmental organizations, and they are doing their best, but without our help, the rest of us, there is nothing they can do. One solution in reducing pollution is the technology transfer from rich countries to developing ones. But I wonder, how come I still breathe the terrible smoke from old and very polluting cars that the Romanians have bought from the Western countries at a very low price? Does this mean technology transfer, or simply a way to remove pollution from one place to another? You probably know that chemicals, the leaking of hazardous waste, landfill contaminated with poisonous products cause so many diseases that young children suffer from. Yet, the most dangerous ones are the environmental disasters. It's been 9 years since the Chernobyl nuclear accident, and we still don't know the exact number of victims. Fact is that children are still born with malformations because of this terrible accident that they will always carry out. By the way, have you ever heard of Kozlodui? That's another old Bulgarian nuclear plant, only 70 kilometers away from my town. Are we about to commit the same mistake twice? These environmental disasters affect not only the people, but also the animals. More facts? Do you want more facts? Remember the Braille oil disaster in the Shetlands. TV viewers watched with dismay birds and fish covered in black, sticky oil. I'll never forget the picture of that dying bird, which is to me the terrible symbol of a possible dying planet. This was not the first oil disaster, and it might not be the last one either. When will governments ever learn to protect the coastlines? I don't say they do not involve themselves, yet I think it is not enough. They should be concerned about food crisis because it can very well become a serious weapon and cause misunderstandings and even bloody wars. Deforestation leads to climatic and environmental changes and causes ozone depletion, global warming, skin cancer, and last but not least, rich agricultural regions to become desert wastelands. I myself have planted some trees, and maybe others did it. Yet, I do think it is not enough. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now only two alternatives for our future: to live or to die. Take my words for a desperate SOS. I use this opportunity to address myself to teenagers here present. Consider yourselves missionaries in your countries for a cleaner world. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the jury, it is up to you to decide upon the best speeches. But it's up to us, I mean all the nations, to decide upon our future. Let's do our best to preserve the purity of our environment on this wonderful blue planet. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker this afternoon is Victoria Carroll from Belgium, who will speak to us on the merits of smoking.
Mr. Chairman, members of the jury, ladies and gentlemen, fellow competitors. The merits of smoking. As you will probably have gathered from the title, this is not going to be a particularly tactful or politically correct speech. Nevertheless, I hope it may provide some food for thought. Smoking clearly has its advantages, besides its well-known side effects. Otherwise, what accounts for the great number of smokers in the world? They're not all masochists with an ultimate death wish. And to prove this fact, just in case you were under the impression that smokers lack intelligence, some of our greatest brains, such as Einstein and Freud, have been chain smokers. I've placed the merits of smoking into 4 categories: the social merits, the health merits, the economic merits, and the completely fatuous merits. The widest category is undoubtedly that of the social merits. The prevailing theme here is coping with people. If you are contentedly puffing away at your Marlboros, you may find that the burden of mindless chatter has suddenly vanished. You've put a foul curtain of Stygian proportions between yourself and your kindly but witless next-door neighbour, who is enthusiastically telling you about her ingrown toenails, or worse still, her hysterectomy over a bowl of summer pudding. Smoking, like walking around with a ghetto blaster, is an excellent method of disturbing and consequently silencing crashing bores and irritating members of one's grandparents' generation who love to rant on about the evil hedonistic pursuits of today's youth. Furthermore, smoking helps you develop a superb smoker's cough, this being an extremely useful asset when dealing with respectable middle-class families who wish to share your compartment on the train. An audible wet rasp with plenty of spit will suffice to send Mum, Dad and the kiddies scampering down the corridor. But smoking can also make you some friends. Lighting up someone's cigarette can be an excellent way of striking up a conversation. Then you can puff and wheeze to your heart's content with a new-made friend. As for the health merits, smokers clearly believe that smoking calms their nerves. As well as the aforementioned social smokers, there are those whose addiction arises from job-related stress. A classic example of this is to be found in journalists or businessmen. So in these cases, smoking helps relieve stress and thus promotes physical and mental well-being. Now for the financial merits of smoking. Smokers themselves may not benefit financially, seeing as they waste their money on fags, but governments and industry do, and society as a whole does. Governments benefit in two ways. Firstly, from tax on tobacco, and secondly, from the fact that smokers tend to die off well before the rest of the population. So think of all the money saved by not having to pay pensions for another 20 years, or for expensive nursing care when they are senile and incontinent. So in this way, because smokers die early, leaving more money to spend around society and fewer people to take up the limited airspace, we could regard them not as social lepers, but as philanthropists. As for the profits industries make, the tobacco industry is clearly the main winner, but the cough sweet industry also makes large profits. So, in reality, smoking can promote social and economic well-being and help limit population growth. Finally, for the completely fatuous merits of smoking. The first of these relates to school games lessons. Smoking makes you rather short of breath, thus making it easier to fake an asthma attack to get you out of an invigorating fitness training session. And secondly, you could buy coloured cigarettes that match your earrings or your eyeshadow. This would invariably pass you off as a person of the most sublime taste and discretion. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that with these merits in mind, you will better understand the plight of the smoker and consequently behave more tolerantly towards him or her. I hope I've demonstrated that smoking is a valuable social habit and, in moderation, an enjoyable pursuit. Thank you. No, I'm afraid I don't. A lot of people have asked me this question. But I have done some very studious research by going around asking lots of smokers I know why they smoke. I've had various responses. One was that it was rather like eating chocolate bars when you're talking to someone boring. It gave you something to do, so you could concentrate on eating or smoking rather than talking to the person. Others said, for example, girls said that they could blow cigarette smoke in a boy's face to make him back off. Or they said that it simply gave them something to do with their hands. Rather than bite their nails, they would smoke a cigarette. So I don't think I need to be a smoker to realise that there are merits to tobacco.
Any other say relative merits of menthol cigarettes over straight tobacco cigarettes?
Well, I think they might taste nicer, and possibly they might not smell as bad on someone's breath after they've smoked them. But I don't know that they give one the same thrill as pure tobacco, normal tobacco. And then also they're probably more expensive, I should think. So that's, you don't want to waste too much money on fags because you want to smoke as many as possible to get the thrill of nicotine as often as possible.
Okay, thank you very much.
Martin Vasilev from Bulgaria is going to speak to us about the suicide of our civilization.
Dear Mrs. Chairman, dear members of the jury, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to speak the suicide of our civilization. And the first I want to say is that we are murdering ourselves because we are not concerned about the global problems and if they do not endanger our life directly and at the present moment. The first problem I want to discuss is alienation. I want to ask you something. How many friends do you have? how much time do you spend with them? Do you think that different and that this time is enough? Or no? I dare say that alienation is the greatest problem of our society, is the greatest problem of our civilization, because today we care only for our relatives and for our closest friends, and we don't care for all the others. They are just people. We don't care for them, and that is a great problem. Even charity today is made for image, not because you have the desire to give or the will to give. Alienation cuts the bonds between all the people, and they cannot organize and cannot cope with other problems which endanger their life and which can eradicate life on Earth. The solution to the alienation problem depends on us. It depends on you, it depends on me, it depends on everyone on this Earth. He can do something or she can do something to prevent alienation. But there are some greater problems, the solution, the answer to which is not in our hands. Such a problem is the pollution. What do we do to prevent pollution? We take some local measures to ease our consciousness, but we don't see the global problem. Or if we see them, we say, that's not my problem, or I can do nothing about it. But you can. And saying, I can do nothing about it, is lack of understanding, lack of will to help, or lack of conscience. Do you know that every hour one species dies? That makes 9,000 unique species that die every year, and that will never reappear during the evolution of life on Earth. That is a great problem, and we do nothing about it. It's almost the same with the nuclear weapon treaties. They are ineffective, and in most cases, they are unworkable. One man decides whether humanity will live or die. One man has the power to eradicate life on Earth. That is the problem. It's like we have put our hands in a noose and we are standing on a horse's back, and this horse can any moment just run away and hang up. That's the problem. Chernobyl and Hiroshima could not awaken us because we said these are just incidents, and we didn't see the global problem, that as long as there are nuclear weapons on Earth, life is in danger. You see, humanity can cope with problems such as nuclear weapons or as pollution, but it has to be organized. That's why I said that the alienation is the greatest problem of our civilization. If we unite, we can cope with the problem, but we are not united. We are not organized, and we are not organized because we say, oh, Chernobyl is so far from here, it can't affect us, but it can, and it will. And that is the problem. And that's why I say that we are committing a suicide at the moment. Because the problems do not endanger our lives directly, and we say these are not our problems, but they are. We are not concerned. We too easily say, that's not my problem. I can do nothing about it. And thus, we are murdering ourselves. We are murdering our future. We are murdering our children. We must never forget that we have borrowed this land from our children. And it's high time we say, I care, if we do not commit the greatest suicide ever known. Thank you.
Heat 2 is Gautam Reddy from India. His speech is entitled Touch Wood.
Respected Chairperson, honorable judges, ladies and gentlemen, walking under a ladder brings bad luck. Finding a horseshoe is lucky. A black cat crossing your path is unlucky. Indeed, my friends, these are some of the superstitions most of us willy-nilly follow. The dictionary meaning of the word superstition is an unreasoning fear of the mysterious, the unknown, and the imaginary. Edmund Brooke calls superstition a religion of the feeble mind. Superstitions have existed in society throughout history. Even highly educated people believe in superstitions from time to time. Vallabhbhai Patel, one of the pillars of our national struggle for freedom, never set out on any government affair without tucking a white handkerchief away in his kurta. Scholars once believed that superstitions dated back to man. For example, in cricket, the score of 111, called the Nelson score, is considered unlucky. Countless activities are involved in superstition. Eating, sleeping, working, playing, getting married, becoming ill, and even dying are not spared by superstition. It seems that superstition has a universal appeal. If in England the rabbit's foot is considered a sign of fertility, in India it is a common practice to shower a bridal couple with rice, rice being a symbol of fertility here. Numbers too are not spared by superstition. The number 13, as we all know, is considered unlucky. In Japan, the number 4, pronounced as she, is not considered lucky because it also sounds like the word used for death. So, most of the buildings in Japan do not have a 4th floor. Many people scoff at superstitions because they believe that they are based on unscientific facts. However, there are several superstitions which are based on science. A good example that may be cited here is looking directly at the sun's rays during a solar eclipse brings misfortune. This superstition originated from the scientific fact that when we look directly at the sun's rays during a solar eclipse, the slightest radiation can damage the eyes. Another superstition involves that lighting cigarettes for 3 individuals with the same matchstick brings misfortune. This superstition originated after the Second World War amongst the armed forces. It was considered that when the first cigarette was being lit at night, the glow of the matchstick alerted the enemy. While the second cigarette was being lit, the enemy prepared to aim. And while the third cigarette was being lit, the enemy aimed and fired. Thus, these examples show us that superstitions are a part and parcel of our lives. I have a pet superstition. It is neither based on religion, nor is it steeped in tradition, but I have been carrying it with me all of my 16 years. And it is that the color green has to be a part of my ensemble. I love superstitions. They offer a comic relief in our usually dull lives, a topic for conversation, and above all, matter for my speech. No, sir. Superstition and astrology are not exactly the same. There is a thin line, but it is distinct, and it is different. And I'm dealing with superstitions and not with astrology.
Superstition is comic and for light leaks. Do you believe that there are any serious superstitions which got to be done?
Yes, I believe that all superstitions are enjoyable and harmless. But, I repeat, there is a clause here. Only to such an extent that we believe them on their face value and not wholeheartedly. The moment you start believing them wholeheartedly, they become dangerous.
I
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Alexander Moran, who is talking on thriving ethnicity.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I'm going to speak to you about indecision. Well, at first I thought this talk was really something easy to prepare, something I could just do it quite quickly, write down some notes, and it would be pretty easy. But I found I couldn't find a topic to talk on. I spent ages and ages trying to find a topic. And finally, I got one. I thought, yes, well, I'm undecided, why not speak about indecision? So, I went to my desk and looked at my desk, and I looked at my pencil case, and I thought, well, shall I use a pen or shall I use a pencil? Pen's so definite, you know? Pencil you can rub out if you want to change something. Yes, so I went for pencil. Lined paper, plain paper. Well, at least lined paper's already got something on the page. So I chose lined paper. Finally, I was getting down to work when my mum called up from the kitchen. What do you want for dinner then? I thought, oh no, all these decisions. Which led me to think, these decisions one makes. Make them on a micro scale every day. Small things, pen or pencil, what you want for dinner. And yet, at this stage in my life, I've come to a point where I have to make some really major decisions. Where I want to go with my life. Do I want to go to university? Which university do I want to go to? What course do I want to study? How do I want to do it? How am I going to do this? How am I going to go about it? And these decisions are really very important because they're going to stay with me for the rest of my life. Now, the thing that affects me with these decisions is there are these various influences which influence me. There's the external influences, such as my parents. My father would like me to do medicine. My mother says, well, do what you want, as long as you're happy, that's all I care about. There are people at school, teachers, want me to get to the best university I can, want me to do as well as I can. I really don't know where it stands. I don't know where I stand. I really don't know what I want to do. All these conflicting influences and my personal desires, which I really can't sort out either. And this decision-making is really difficult. And yet it galvanizes me into action. It makes me think what I want to do, why I want to do it, if I really want to do the things I think I want to do. And I think that's very important. I thrive on this. Now, I think decision-making is a very important factor in our lives. I think decision-making is a very important factor in our lives because if you don't make your own decisions, then you are not going to live your own life. I believe in free will, that people should make their own decisions, do what they want to with their own lives. If you don't make your own decisions, if you let other people make decisions for you, you're going to get nowhere. You're going to have no sense of achievement when you get where you're going to get. And when you get there, you don't even know if it's you who wanted to get there in the first place. It could have been your parents that have influenced you, or your school, or teachers, or friends. And in the end, I think only real satisfaction comes from making your own decisions. Free will is what I believe in, rather than determinism. Now, the thing is, you've also got to learn to live with your decisions. In physics nowadays, and at the level of subatomic physics, they have come to the conclusion that you can't be certain about anything. They don't know what's happening in a given system at a given time, and they can't predict what's going to happen in the future. And it's the same on a macro level. When you make decisions in your life, you don't know whether they're going to be the right decisions, the best decisions, but at least you make them. And that's the important thing. Because decision-making gives you a sense of who you are. If you've got to where you've got to because of yourself and not because of other people, I think that is terribly important. Going back to chaos theory, this is chaos theory they use to predict things. Chaos is based on probability. They don't know what is happening, why it's happening, and what's going to happen in the future. And you can apply this to human behavior. Nowadays, they apply chaos theory to economic development. What's going to happen in the future in terms of economics, which by traditional methods never works, as we all know, as we watch every year as the government produces its budget. So my personal view is that happiness can only be achieved through your own decisions, through free will. And after all, happiness is a cigar called Hamlet. Well, it doesn't really matter what brand it is, as long as you're smoking. Thank you.
Today is Pia from Estonia on mercy or killing.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here to pay our last respect to a woman who died suffering long and hard. I would not like these words to be the ones spoken at my funeral. Neither would you, I'm sure. What makes us say that euthanasia is mercy? And what is the reason that makes us say euthanasia is killing? Having based my speech and research in the National Library and on talking with lawyers and doctors, I will touch upon the history of euthanasia and also the ethics and law connected with it. And I hope that some light will be shed on the question, is euthanasia mercy or killing? Euthanasia literally means a good death in Greek. But in ancient Greece, however, it meant only relieving the pain of the person about to die. The term in itself did not comprise the actual killing of that person. Upon mentioning the word euthanasia, one might be reminded of the Nazis, who practiced it on the Jews, alcoholics, drug addicts, people with so-called racial defects. But I'm not talking about that. This was genocide, not euthanasia. What I am talking about is voluntary euthanasia. What I am talking about is merely a man's right to determine his own life. Today, voluntary euthanasia is legal only in the Netherlands, where the government battled over this subject for 21 years. But bills concerning death on demand have been under consideration in many other countries as well. For a number of people, death means days, weeks, or even years of suffering, and for many the pain becomes so intense that drugs can no longer relieve it. But if the pain does not reach such a high level, distress is caused by the fact that the incurably ill often sink into helplessness and total dependence on others. It is exactly this loss of self-control and dependence on others that makes voluntary euthanasia so widely advocated. But where do we draw the line? How can we know that the person applying for euthanasia is not merely obsessed with the idea of dying? Well, doctors, as it is, may help patients to die only if the patient, if their patient's condition is hopeless and if the pain has become intolerable. And psychiatrists have come to the conclusion that persons terminally ill do not have a pathological death wish. As long as you value your life, you have a natural will to live. But if machines and mechanical devices are the only things keeping you alive, you no longer have the right nor the freedom to die. We are granted by law the freedom to die. That means we may choose death over life, if such is our wish. But no one is permitted to help us if we cannot commit such an act due to terminal illness or severe handicap. So some of us have been denied this right. Voluntary euthanasia very often is battled on the grounds that it by far exceeds the ethics, and the doctors exercising it are murderers by law. So let us take a closer look at that law. By law, doctors have a constitutional obligation to preserve life as long as humanly possible. But at the same time, ethically, according to their hypocritical oath, they are to relieve pain at any cost. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, through this medical science constrainment, death is justified to some extent. But it would be inhuman if doctors were forced to use voluntary euthanasia against their wills. They would be turned into executioners. I would like to quote what an oncologist said as I was speaking to him. Doctors should have a constitutional freedom to choose whether they want to practice voluntary euthanasia, and patients should also have the right to choose. I would not like these words, "We are gathered here to pay our last respects to a woman who suffered long and hard for a painful death," be spoken at my funeral. Death is our last act, the last phase of our life. We should be granted the chance to commit that act with dignity. Thank you.
Next participant today is Natalia de Munich from Belgium, who will be speaking on sign language.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I suppose you can all hear me loud and clear. But imagine everyone in this room would be deaf. No one would understand me. No one would have the slightest idea what I'm talking about. You would see me, you would see my lips move, but that's all. Quite frightening, isn't it? I would have to use signs to make myself clear. Signs you would have to understand. And these signs would have to speak for themselves, because I wouldn't be able to explain their meaning to you, since you were all deaf. Impossible, I can see you think. Still, there are people whose mother tongue is sign language. And it is exactly about these people and about their language I would like to talk to you today. Now, in fact, signing isn't restricted to sign language. Hearing people also sign. Just think of images of the stock exchange in Tokyo, or of a public sale, and you immediately see people making gestures with their hands, their eyes, their heads. Or in daily life, most people find it extremely difficult to say something important by way of telephone. You can't see the other one. You don't see his eyes. You don't see his head. You don't see his body language. And this so-called body language is maybe just as important as our words are. Now, all these daily life gestures are universal. Almost everyone, everywhere, understands the meaning of "come on" or "very good." And that is why most people also think of sign language, the language of the deaf, as a universal language. Now, this is wrong. There is no such thing as a universal sign language. And there is a very simple explanation for that. Sign language is, just as English or French, a natural language, which means it has developed and changed over ages and ages. And of course, it hasn't developed in the same way in France as it has in Australia or elsewhere. Now, it is a fact that certain people have influenced this development. For example, the Abbé Épée in France. And therefore I think it is interesting to give you a short historical review. The history of sign language starts in the Middle Ages. Before this period, people believed the deaf were untrainable. Aristotle even said they couldn't think. And people kept this belief until, in the Middle Ages, a law was promulgated. A law which said you could only inherit if you were able to speak. Now, rich aristocratic families immediately started to hire teachers to teach their deaf sons how to speak. These cases were still exceptional, but at least it was proved that deaf people can learn things and that they can think. In the 16th century, monks and sisters started with schools for the deaf. And the two most important ones were the school of the Abbé in France, using signs, and the school of Heinrich in Germany, using oral methods. He wanted to teach his children how to speak, and also lip reading was very important in this school. Now, this of course means that at about the same time, you now had two important schools. And as about everywhere else in history, they both wanted to prevail over the other. Finally, in 1880, with the Congress of Milano, a jury decided oral methods would be used all over Europe. There even came a general prohibition on sign language, which means it wasn't used in school anymore. Deaf children were even punished for signing instead of speaking during recreation. But of course, the deaf didn't stop signing. They never will. It is their natural way of communication. If deaf children aren't allowed to sign, they aren't allowed to communicate. They aren't allowed to express themselves. And they would become frustrated, stressed, and finally even uncommunicative. And this, I believe, can never be the intention. Now, what I am trying to say here is not that signs are better than oral methods, because this simply isn't true. What I am saying is you can't separate the two things. Deaf children have to learn how to speak, since we live in a hearing society, but signs also have a value. For deaf children, it is just as difficult to learn how to speak as it would be for you to learn Italian from a television without any sound. And again, I can see you think, impossible. Now, deaf children have to do this. They don't have a choice. And that is why I think they at least should have the possibility to communicate without fulfilling a task at the same time. Now, I think mixed schools, using signs for several subjects and oral methods for others, could be a solution. I might say, I am in the second year of a 3-year course to become an interpreter for the deaf. And every week again, I realize how special this silent language is. Every week again, I am extremely glad I got to know this language, and that never again I will be deaf among deaf. Thank you very much for listening.
Rancher from Mauritius, who will be talking on the importance of the study of literature in our modern world.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I don't know how many people here study literature or have studied literature, but I'm sure most of them must have asked themselves at some point of time what future literature held for them. Indeed, in a world which constantly demands science, which demands technology, economics, one really wonders what place literature holds under the sun. In other words, what's the use? Well, it's quite ironical that we should ask this question, because indeed we've never needed literature more than we do today. But first of all, where does literature study start? It begins when the child first opens a book and discovers the pleasure of reading. And already there's a new horizon which opens up before him. And more to that, he starts getting a notion of what's good and what's bad. Now, I'm not saying that literature should replace religion, but with what's been happening lately, with our values which are going down, which are being lost, I think that God is in need of crutches, and literature just might be one of those crutches. And in addition to teaching morality, literature develops a certain sensitivity in the person. And this is very important, because when you develop a sensitivity to words, to characters which are not living things, it follows that you get a greater sense of understanding, so you can understand your fellow man. So it makes social relationships much more easy, much more peaceful perhaps. And I'd also say that literature is a kind of eye-opener to the problems that surround us, that are existing in the modern world. For example, we all know that in every society there are top dogs and underdogs. But we needed an Orson Welles to come and tell us that all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Thus, messages like this are very subtle sometimes. And if we don't study literature, sometimes it's quite difficult to really seize the message. So you just read a book and, oh, it was a good book, so you put it back. And most of all, I think literature gives you a new approach to what you're reading. It's not just you read and you finish, no. You start getting into philosophy, much beyond Barbara Cartland, really. And it's about deep thinking. It's about, you get to explore, through the literature, you get to know the person who wrote it. So it's like you discover the spirit of the genius who wrote it. You see that he's still alive. And also, well, nowadays we're a bit utilitarian, we say. So what's the practical use? Well, if we want the practical use, I might say that, well, for example, it can help propagate a language. If we take English, for example, we want to propagate English, but it's not enough just to impose a language, just to say this is a passport to the world. You have to give the people beauty. You have to attract them. When they see literature, they see Shakespeare, they see Keats. So they say, I must learn this language because there are real beauties which will open up before me when I learn the language. But most important of all, I think literature has the function of replacing the magic that is being lost by the advent of science. Because, for example, I like the warmth of light on my skin. So I don't want tomorrow to say that I like the heat induced by rays of photons on my epidermis. No, you have to have a certain beauty in the language. But in any case, to come back to our question, what is the use of literature? The answer is none. But then it is just as useless as painting. It is just as useless as music. It is just as useless as beauty. And it is just as useless as our human soul. Thank you. I'm open to questions.
Is Oana Silvescu from Romania, who is going to speak on Romania, European country.
Well, ladies and gentlemen and members of the jury, I'd like to begin my speech by telling you what happened to me about a year ago when a boy from a Western country approached me and asked, "You are from Romania, right? You have big problems there after the revolution. But by the way, where does your country lie anyway?" I was astonished, ladies and gentlemen, to see that an 18-year-old teenager from a Western country, and I assure you that unfortunately he was not the only one in this situation, did not even know that Romania was lying in Europe, just like England, like France or Germany. We have been in Europe for centuries. We were here long ago when the Romans conquered Asia in 106 AD. We were here during the Middle Ages when Stephen the Great and his army fought so hard against the Turks. And while Stephen could see how his people were dying in the battle, trying to form a barrier to the expansion of the Turkish Empire, the French could build their castles in France, and Spain, the Netherlands, and England were developing their colonial empires across the Atlantic. Fortunately, they had time to do such things. We did not. Think of this. It was in 1475, yes, it was in 1475 that Stephen's army killed about 100,000 Turkish young men. A year later, another 100 Turkish young men were killed while they were trying to conquer Romania. So you can imagine the biological void that was created within the Turkish Empire in 2 years. Now, Some of you may well know that a Turkish man can have about 4 wives, taking into account the birth rate at that time, which was quite high. How many kids would those men have had if they had remained alive? I can tell you, I'm quite keen on mathematics, that about 30 million soldiers would have appeared in the Turkish army, and they could have easily conquered Europe. Now, ladies and gentlemen, remember the Second World War. We were here at that time as well, when we fought so hard against the Germans, and after which war we lost so many territories, and the communist system took control of Romania. And during the communist system, we were in Europe as well, even though you knew such a few things about us because of that closed oppressive system. And here we are now, ladies and gentlemen, freed or almost freed from the chains of the communism, trying to make our country a democratic one. But why is it, ladies and gentlemen, that now that we are free, most Western people have been informed mainly about the negative aspects in our society? Why is it that the international media talks mainly about the number of the handicapped, or about the children that have AIDS there, or about anything that represents a big problem? Why can't they see the marvels we have there as well? Why can't they see the beautiful scenery that is waiting for foreign visitors, or the kindness and the hospitality of the Romanian people, or the intelligence of the Romanian teenagers educated in our schools? Romania, ladies and gentlemen, is now like a bud ready to bloom. It is ready to offer to the whole wide world a beautiful country to visit, a great history to learn about, and interesting people to meet. We are a very old civilization, ladies and gentlemen, and we do belong to Europe. In fact, this problem of belonging to Europe is an artificial one. Of course we belong to Europe because we lie there. The problem is that nowadays our standard of living is not yet as appropriate for a highly civilized and democratic Western European country. But I, as the representative of the young generation in Romania, am optimistic about Romania's future. And I do trust my people and myself to make Romania a better place to live in. I know we can do it. What we need now is time and your understanding. And I also think that more investment could be done in Romania, as well as more political exchanges with my country in order to strengthen the democracy there. Cultural exchanges between schools, as well as more educational projects through sports, theatre, art generally speaking, are also needed. But no such relations could exist, ladies and gentlemen, unless the real, complete image about Romania is got. And in fact, this is mainly the main reason of my delivering this speech here in front of you, where so many members of the English-speaking Union have gathered together. The English-speaking Union being such a great organization that promotes friendship and, most important, understanding worldwide. Thank you very much.
Why she's so keen for Romania to be included amongst the ignorant masses of Europe. I would like to ask you why you're so keen for Romania to be included amongst the apparently ignorant Europeans.
Are you trying to imply that Romanians are ignorant or something?
No, not at all, sorry. Your example at the beginning of your speech showed what poor knowledge most Europeans had of Romania. What advantage do you think it would be to Romania to be included as part of Europe?
Well, I was just trying to make my point that Romania is part of Europe. So I really can't understand why do you think that there should be an advantage? We're not talking here about advantages. The point is that we are in Europe and we should be accepted as such.
Okay. Any other questions?
The question of Romania being part of Europe is only a historical one?
No, actually. No, I don't think so. I hope you did not think that I meant it to be like this. It is true that our level of civilization now, after the communist system, and now in this period of transition to a democratic country, is not, our level of civilization is not as good as those in most civilized countries. But we are trying to make our best in order to reach those levels. I have a question.
Okay, thank you very much. Speaker, who's Leslie Ward from Scotland, who will speak on the issues raised by new genetic research. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Picture this. You are delighted to find yourself pregnant and are anxious to do everything that you can to ensure that you have a healthy baby. Your doctor recommends a few tests. There's nothing to worry about, it's just routine. You're taken in to receive the results, and everything appears to be normal. There's no spina bifida and there's no Down syndrome. But there is just one thing. We have made an antenatal diagnosis and feel that we should give this information to you. What you do with it is up to you. The doctor then proceeds to tell you that the fetus which you are carrying, while perfectly normal in every other way, may possess genes which predispose it to aggressive, antisocial, and possibly even criminal behavior. Do you demand the termination of pregnancy? Do you say, can you be more specific? I mean, are we talking about a predisposition to serial killing or tax evasion here? Or do you say loftily that criminals are not born? There is such a thing as free will, and that you will have none of this neurogenetic determinism. Ladies and gentlemen, a scientist at a private conference in Britain at the CIBA Foundation claimed that the technology may already be available to make such an antenatal diagnosis. Dr. David Goldman from the Laboratory of Neurogenetics at the US National Institute of Health said that such information should be given to families, though any decision to abort should be taken privately. Personally, I was relieved to find that the conference has been heavily criticised by scientists and criminologists alike, who are wary of attributing crime to genetic factors. There was also talk at the CIBA conference of whether genetic evidence could be used as a mitigating factor in court. Even if this is ruled inadmissible, many lawyers and scientists believe that it will be used in the future, just as we are now seeing evidence of premenstrual syndrome and hyperactivity being submitted in some cases. It is worth noting that this debate surfaced in the same week as the Roundtree Foundation claims that there are growing gulfs between the richest and the poorest in Britain, and also as a report from the Employment Policy Institute said that whatever the government might say, rising crime and rising unemployment are connected. You see, ladies and gentlemen, it is my belief that we are a complex combination of nature and nurture, a product of the way in which our raw genetic material is cooked by the environment in which we live. To identify a criminal gene seems almost as primitive as Lombroso's 19th century notion of dividing up swindlers from murderers on the basis of facial characteristics. Yet we must ask ourselves, why does this kind of genetic determinism hold such sway? Possibly because so few of us really understand much about things like the amygdala, neurotransmitters, and the controversial claim that there is a link between a point mutation in the structural gene monominoxidase inhibitor, whatever that might be, and antisocial behavior. And it is for this reason that we swallow whole chunks of popularized, oversimplified, and very often suspect sociobiology and neurogenetics. In recent years, a number of theories have filtered down which are disturbing to say the least. Charles Murray and Richard Herrnstein's book, The Bell Curve, has resuscitated the argument that there is a link between intelligence and race in order to explain the huge black underclass of America. Simon LeVay claims to have found a gay gene and even a gay brain, and it is claimed that there are genes which cause violence and alcoholism. Ladies and gentlemen, it is profoundly disturbing to me that a predisposition to a particular kind of behaviour can be misread by some geneticists as predestination. The argument goes something like this. These things are written in the stars, or if not in the stars, then in the long strings of DNA that make us what we are. Our fate is decided in the womb. Will I be happy? Will I be gay? Will I be locked up? Que sera, sera. If it is your personal biological makeup that makes you do the things that you do, then don't blame it on the conditions that you grew up in. Giving you an income and a place to live won't change your life. So, ladies and gentlemen, I have a little something to help you get your neurotransmitters sorted once and for all. Just remember that it's not your fault, and it's most certainly not mine. You were just born that way. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps you should consider yourself lucky to have been born at all.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask the Speaker if the question of genetic predisposition could be solved by having the children of unruly, naughty, criminal parents adopted at birth and taken away from the influences of the parents rather than aborted?
Thank you for that question, because I feel it raises a tremendously important point. A predisposition to a particular kind of behaviour doesn't mean that you're predestined to be like that. I mean, someone who has aggressive tendencies, that could be channeled with the right environmental influences into someone who has aggressive business sense, and thus making it a successful quality rather than a negative attribute. I hope that answers your question.
The next person up is Stanislav Rusev from Bulgaria, who will be talking on that which is not eternal, is not real.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. The here chosen quotation of the Spanish philosopher Miguel de Unamuno, that which is not eternal is not real, will serve as a beginning for an ascertainment of the transitional period which earthly life is. It will also serve as a starting point for a number of arguments in favor of the spiritual absolute God as the only possible substance. For a century now, modern and postmodern art have with reason been searching for reality, the reality of transcendental cognition. There arises the question, do really all those people propagating the heterogeneous aesthetic programs of that art have only been looking for a way of escape from the earthly reality which does not give them satisfaction? It is proved by science that repose is relative in this world. The relativity of repose is as valid for organisms as for the material nature of things. Even if the things in this world seem to be motionless, it is just an effective ease, because their smallest particles are in constant motion. That which is absolutely unstable does not have permanent characteristics. Motion is real only as a motion. It has no static reality. Transitoriness means dependence on outer influences. As far as we are changeable, such as falling under different influences, we are temporary in our nature. We cannot display ourselves in an easily perceptible form. We cannot grant ourselves constant characteristics. Ours is a transient world, having no features of an objective reality. Our world is caused by external nature. Some people think that atoms are the origin of this world, others that it is God, the spiritual absolute. But in both cases, reality should be the prime cause. That the caused thing cannot be assumed to be an objective independent reality, because it is always the result of the prime cause, and the result taken alone is invalid. This world is not an objective reality because it is undoubtedly based on something, it develops and aims at something. Everything in this world is in a process of development. Only an everlasting, unchangeable substance can be reality because of its possessing constant and real characteristics, not dependent on limitations and changes of time and space. Nothing seen or unseen, making its existence only within this world, can be defined as substance, for substance exists on its own account. Matter is relative in its transience, also in its various forms, created and changed by different circumstances. Matter is not a substance, for it has no final aspect. The objective reality, that which is the cause for everything else, should have its own will, consciousness, and creative power. This only could be God, the spiritual absolute, because will and consciousness are not intrinsic to the formless, changeable matter. The Bible explains that people were not granted an eternal, unchangeable life because they averted themselves from heavenly nature by accepting evil. God granted man freedom to choose and to change his life and the norms of his conduct, which would foreordain his position toward eternity. The most precise definition for the state of things in this world is state of transition. In the features of transition, there stands as a fact, according to the moral imperatives that man is to choose as norms of his conduct, there stands as a fact the alternative position towards eternity. Faith is not a feeling of man's soul, but man's entering reality, says the German philosopher Martin Buber. Vision of life slips away with a ghostly smile. The visible inconspicuousness erases the circles on the water surface where somebody has clung his own desperations. Thank you.
Mehryar Ghazali from Pakistan, who is speaking on the nemesis of modern science.
A humanity held captive to its own civilization. A juggernaut created to serve mankind now stands almost ready to strangle it. Pollution, congestion, an atmosphere that corrupts the lungs. Man's existence lies threatened by calamities of his very own construction. Science, in its quest for reaching frontiers beyond man's wildest imagination, creates its own Frankensteins, its own monsters. It has automated, declassified, and degenerated the genius of man. That man who was a Prometheus, who was a Hercules and Atlas, and now groans under the yoke of oppressive technology. Ladies and gentlemen, I am not here to denounce the achievements of modern science. As a matter of fact, I wholeheartedly appreciate its benefits and comforts. I simply wish to draw your attention today towards the fact that while scientific progress has made our lives easy and simple in many ways, it has simultaneously enhanced the risk factor and has created a sense of insecurity and fear amongst the people. It has given rise to issues and has led to moral, religious, and judicial debates. Mankind is no longer threatened by natural disasters alone. Scientific achievements can prove far more devastating. I refer here to nuclear technology and arms of mass destruction. Ladies and gentlemen, even peaceful nuclear capabilities have proven to be seriously detrimental. We all have not quite put Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and the Windscale disasters behind us. Science has created the perfect tool for self-destruction of all life in the form of nuclear weaponry. Hats off to scientific advancement in the field of medicine. We live longer and healthier, but amidst all that, the moral, social, and religious disputes arising out of the so-called breakthroughs in this field are growing by leaps and bounds. I recall a recent talk show on television where a set of confused siblings told a story of how their family broke up because their daddy decided to leave home, go through a sex change operation, and return a year later as mommy number 2. Don't be surprised, ladies and gentlemen, if somewhere in the near future you see an advertisement on television saying, "Science, making your hottest and darkest sexual fantasies a living reality." Media is another field where science is at its zenith. And where has that led us? Susceptible minds have been wrought with violence, sadism, abuse, and cultural invasions have disoriented entire generations. Media, though remarkable, is coupled with inseparable, crippling side effects. Agreed, the world is a better place thanks to the Industrial Revolution. But what has it done to our atmosphere, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the soil we till? Even our space is being polluted by leaking reactors used to power satellites. Space. It's been a junkyard up there. Now it's a radioactive one. And nowhere are the flaws of blind acceptance of such technology more evident than from where I come from, the developing world. Ladies and gentlemen, let me assure you that we are the ones who suffer the most at the hands of science. A science whose benefits we still lack, but whose hazards we have to deal with. Our seas, our rivers, and our lands have become home to the dumping of toxic waste. Pesticides and drugs banned in developed countries are sold brazenly in the third world by multinationals whose sole aim is to recover their development costs. Our economically backward countries are now also losing their rich cultures for which they have been marveled at, thanks to the wonderful satellite invasion. Ladies and gentlemen, scientific advancement has come to a point where the scientists have got to think. They have got to redefine their commitment to the future. They have got to alleviate the damage they have done. And they have got to accept the fact that their achievements may well become tools of vice and destruction in the hands of our society. Modern science has to understand that the world is not just an exhibition ground for them to show off their fantastic inventions and discoveries, but a living stage where man needs to feel safe and secure, especially from disasters of his own creation. Ladies and gentlemen, I leave you with the thought that scientists have got to make the world a better place to live in, and not just a spectacle to marvel at. I thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask the Speaker, is the fault in science or in the human beings who use the technology?
Exactly. So this is what is happening nowadays is that our scientific development has come to a point where people in power are using scientists for their own means, for their own ends. And that is what I'm trying to point out here, that scientists have got to realize that they are now becoming puppets in the hands of power-hungry people. And what scientists have got to do is not check their development, but just make a critical analysis of their development. And ladies and gentlemen, they can very easily do that now by virtue of myriads of electronic aids and tools available to scientists today, which makes it possible to make a critical analysis of breakthroughs before launching them, and thus saving this world from the possibility of further self-annihilation. And that is the point I'm trying to make. Thank you.
Would you put a limit on the curiosity of mankind?
Definitely not. I have not said it once, even, ladies and gentlemen, that science definitely has no limit. But again, ladies and gentlemen, if science is based on simple logic, think of this. If science is based on logic, then would it be illogical for the scientists to make an analysis of what could happen from the discovery, what they could do to this world? It is very logical if scientists take a little time out and just analyze that. And that is what I'm asking them to do, and that is what I'm hoping they will do in the future. to make a better future for our generations that are still to come. Yes, please go.
Would you agree with me that the world would be a much better place if they started teaching physics in school?
Physics. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm a very bad student of physics, but again, the world could also stop functioning if people didn't study physics, because physics is a very important field, and I don't like science too much in the sense I'm a weak student, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to say ban physics, because some people need it and some people excel there, so I'm not saying demolish it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Is Martin Reichardt from Austria, who'll be talking on Here We Come, Austria Goes European.
Ladies and gentlemen, after this rather intriguing speech about a global general problem, let me draw your attention to a problem of rather local nature, which I believe does lack nothing in graveness and actuality to the people concerned. The title of my speech is Here We Come, Austria Goes European. I'm from Austria, as you can see. You heard what happened there last year. At the beginning of 1995, after a landslide vote, the Austrian Republic joined the European Union. The result, 66% in favour, came as a total surprise for the most perceptive of officials, and they had expected a close run-up. Preceding the referendum, there had been a fierce debate that cut across generations and even divided families, such as was the case in my own family. The debate centred mainly on the profit that our country could expect to reap. Many leading spokesmen promised a rise in export sales owing to the lifting of customs, allowing trade to flow more freely. Now, wealth, and I mean material wealth, also proved a great crowd puller, which is mostly emphasised by governmental authorities. Why wealth, you might ask? Austria is far from being a poor country. Our GNP per capita is way above the EU average, coming close to Germany's, and our social market economy has produced great stability. Just as a matter of pride, I'd like to note that our ecological standards came second only to Australia in a recent survey. During the campaign, I had the impression that the government, strongly in favour of joining, were staking their own ends against the common good. Instead of informing the people on a neutral base, all they did was point at the advantages of joining. They had all the media on their payroll, and I believe they still continue to do so, and they used this power to whip public opinion into line. They even went so far as to use taxpayers' money for their campaign. Thus the taxes of someone who was opposed to their view were indirectly used to persuade him otherwise. As this absurd reality become commonplace, I realised the course of democracy, I mean responsible democracy, not what we're having in the headlines every day, was being changed here, and this is hard for me to say now. For the first time in my life, I felt ashamed of my own country, and I wonder, has anyone here ever experienced this feeling? Recently, I was told of an incident that confirmed my disgusted suspicions. Malton farmers in Austria used to be supported by the state to reflect their economic disadvantage. Now, under the new EU statutes, which redistributed the funds, determining financial needs based on the average age of the land each farmer owned, a great many lowlanders found they had been declared disadvantaged mountain farmers because they had but a single high mountain peak in their territory. Meanwhile, other farmers, high up in the really mountainous regions, and I'm talking about 3,000 feet above sea level here, were bereft of the funding they needed to sustain their living. This grotesque misinterpretation on behalf of the European Commission, who's responsible here, a true travesty of poetic justice, as I might put it, understandably gave Brussels a bad name in those regions. But curiously enough, nothing of this ever reached the media. As you can see, a whole nation was and is still being fooled. So Austria finally entered the European Union. The mold was bestowed upon my country like an ill-fitting garment, like a fellow wearing a Leeds football shirt and chanting, "Glory, glory, Man United." You get strange looks. The same thing holds true for Austria and the EU. The blue shirt with the yellow stars doesn't fit our societal and political fabric yet. The shirt is too large, if I might put it like that, and that's not only for our croppers. But still, there is some good for Austria and the EU. A larger scope of opportunities is now on offer, especially for people my age, and also the entry poses a new challenge for political and economic thinking. So, to close my speech, let me voice my feelings to the other EU members, our so-called comrades in trade. We have joined the ranks. For us, this may not have been the best of choices. We'll do great business in Austria, no doubt. But do treat us fairly, and you'll find the nicest business partners you've ever had, and the most reliable ones. Fail to do so, and face a stampede to Brussels, which I dare say you'll never forget.
Is Roxana Martinez de San Vicente from Argentina, who will be speaking on the topic quit claim.
Every time we ask ourselves whether we should or shouldn't do something, it would be good if we kept our responsibilities in mind. As human beings, we are capable of deciding what we want to do and should be aware of our duties. Wouldn't it be good if we were able to render account for our actions without any regrets whatsoever? Of course, it is understandable that this is very difficult to do. You probably know what I'm talking about, since one of the most common problems man faces is too many things to do and too little time to do them, which, sadly, is no reason for being irresponsible. Surely you agree that an accountable person is an agreeable person. I say this because someone who is reliable and trustworthy is probably also good at heart, and somehow it seems that the turnout of the doings of life will be better if managed responsibly and thus agreeably. Let's consider work, which is probably the main cause of concern for a lot of us. It's very important that we approach our work with our best judgment possible if we intend to get good jobs and keep them. A teacher's job, for example, is on an extremely human level. A teacher-student relationship involves a great many responsibilities on both sides. But, most importantly, a teacher is in charge of the education of many people. If a teacher goes wrong, a lot might go wrong in the future. This leads me to mention the example of manufacturing companies. Those who are in charge of production factories should be aware of the fact that our planet is being greatly damaged by pollution, a lot of it being industrial waste. Factories should finance research programs to try to fix the damage they've done, and more importantly, avoid making the same mistakes again. What future can we offer our children if we leave behind a rotting landscape? The conception of responsibility should start at home. How responsible are we for our own children? Of course, we have our jobs to attend to, our spouses to care for, our friends to see, our interests to seek. Where do all these leave the people we brought into the world and are supposedly responsible for? Again, we are faced with a difficult problem to solve. And maybe it's time we sat down and asked ourselves what our priorities are. It is our responsibility not only to go to our jobs, but to tend to all the other commitments we have taken in life. If we took the freedom of bringing new people into the world, we cannot take the freedom of neglecting them. Lincoln said, "Men should utter nothing for which they will not willingly be responsible through time and eternity." While I'm on the subject of the responsibility for the care or welfare of another, I would like to mention the great load on the backs of those working shoulder to shoulder with the law. A man who is to determine about the lives of others should be somebody highly capable of making moral and rational decisions. How trustworthy can one man be in order to be counted on to make sound decisions? How much authority can a certain group of people have in order to decide what the law is or should be? Each one of us should decide what we must and mustn't do according to what we think is best for ourselves and for the people around us, maintaining our self-respect and the respect for our planet and its inhabitants. The idea is that we maintain peace and harmony in mankind, and it is up to each one of us to try to keep balance. We are extremely liable to making mistakes, and we should try to learn from them. Which way? Acting as responsibly as we possibly can. To end up, I would like to quote John F. Kennedy's wise words. Our success or failure will be measured by the answers to 4 questions. First, were we truly men of courage? Second, were we truly men of judgment? Third, were we truly men of integrity? And finally, were we truly men of dedication? Thank you.
Sylvia Barbier from the Netherlands on public speaking.
Sylvia, said my English teacher, we have got to think of a subject for the public speaking competition this year. Now, every year that is the biggest problem, finding a suitable subject. I thought, and after I've bitten all my nails off, it finally hit me. My subject for the public speaking competition was going to be public speaking itself. And I'll give you some good reasons why I chose that particular subject. I suppose everybody in this audience has been to several parties or receptions at work where there was somebody who rendered a speech. And did it never occur that the speech was too slow, not loud enough, and so boring? I believe that public speaking should be a pleasure for both the speaker as for the audience. Public speaking is being practiced increasingly as a broader range of people are being called upon to say a few words in front of an audience. Many speakers are seized with stage fright as they rise upon their feet. Now, I believe that this stage fright could be prevented or at least be controlled if those people were taught in their younger years how to deal with their stage fright. In school, we learn how to express ourselves in French, in German. We learn a lot of things about history and geography, but the one thing I think we need even more than that knowledge is not taught in school, and that is how to speak in public. Dale Carnegie wrote a book that's entitled How to Develop Self-Confidence and Influence People by Public Speaking. He wrote, "Stride forth bravely, stop, stand still, and act as if you love it. Draw yourself up to your full height and look your audience straight in the eyes. Talk as confidently as if every one of them owed you money." Modern psychologists have a rational explanation for the phenomenon known as stage fright. They say that what people are really afraid of is the possibility of humiliation resulting from failure or criticism. Perhaps the first thing a prospective speaker should know about stage fright is that everybody in a like situation has it. Some of the most outwardly masterful speakers in history must have felt their knees knock when they first faced an audience. We all remember Martin Luther King, "I have a dream." He may well have been a natural talent, but I'm quite certain that even members of the royal families at some stage in their careers are taught how to speak in public. It may well be reassuring to be taught in school that the audience you will once have to face is naturally less conscious of your nervousness than you are. The tremor in your voice might sound like a jackhammer in your own head, but ask your friends in the audience afterwards and they've probably never noticed it. I believe that public speaking should be an obligatory school subject in secondary school, so that the awkward public speaking situations can be reduced and that nobody has to stand in front of an audience with knocking knees and their tongues sticking to the roof of their mouths. A sense of unity and message. This is what could be taught at school. A general worldwide acquaintance with the technique of public speaking may even serve a little bit of peace and safety, because not knowing how to make your message heard may lead to frustration and ultimately to blind destruction. Also, when we all know about the skills of speaking public in a convincingly way, then we will be more alert to the quality of the speech. And then phonetics, so-called phonetics, political phonetics, would not have the chance to sweep people off their feet and to turn them into mute supporters of deadly causes. In Holland, I already spoke on this subject. It is very dear to my heart, and I think it is wonderful to defend it here once again. I then hoped for two obvious questions, but they did not come then, and they might not come now. And since the answers are very valuable to my questions, I will put them myself. 1. Who are to teach public speaking? And 2. How is marking to be done? The teachers, actors, at least in Holland we have a lot of unemployed actors, so I think it would be splendid to have them as our instructors. And the marking, not for achievement, because a pupil's natures will always play a role, but for perseverance and enjoyment, like in physical education. I really hope you have enjoyed my speech and that you did not notice how very nervous I was. Thank you.
Thank you for being such an attentive audience. The judges now are going to confer amongst themselves, and perhaps it would be a good idea if we all reach downstairs, and there'll be an announcement at 12:30 in the adjoining room.
And then we put the last bit, I rather like it.
Three people to go forward to the finals. In no particular order, we have Muniza Zaida from Pakistan. Christopher Hurrell from Australia. And Ashwin Rumasubramanian from India.
And could I too add my word of thanks to all the speakers we heard this morning. 12 different topics, everyone interesting, everyone superbly delivered, and the lady who spoke about sleep, I can assure you there wasn't a moment of it as far as we were concerned. A thoroughly enjoyable morning. We'd like everybody to go forward to the final, but presumably that would take far too long. Thank you very much indeed.
What I felt was most important was, did the speaker communicate the topic to us so that we were interested in the topic and we wanted to listen to the speaker? All the speakers did that, certainly to a very competent degree and to a greater or lesser extent. So add, actually, that I think the topic is also important. I would give, if I were a speaker, some consideration to the topic I was going to choose. Bear in mind, if you choose however intellectual or esoteric a topic, remember that the audience and the judges are going to have to ask you questions. The idea of those questions is really for you to display your ability as a public speaker in dealing with those questions. If you choose a subject where the audience can't really ask questions of you, then you're handicapping yourself
in the competition.
Yes, yes. A very strong recommendation, but hasn't quite got in the final three, was Michael Capalgo. No, sorry, take that back. Javier Calhat, number 13, who we wrestled with, judges and I. We're still on speaking terms, but we do want to give a very strong recommendation, and I'm sorry he hasn't featured in the last three. And in the last three feature Sophie Enion from Scotland on egalitarianism, Victoria Carroll, Belgium, on the merits of smoking, and Gautam Reggie from India on touch wood.
For all speakers, and I appreciate, because I'm using this piece of paper because of your names, that I've got a piece of paper in front of me, but do always be careful of the use of notes. Do always, please, be careful about the use of footwork. Some of you may have noticed on the introductory sheet that I'm the director of the Council for Arms Control. It isn't that sort of arms, but nevertheless, they do need controlling, and so do feet. And going walkabouts can, to some extent, be an advantage, but being walkabouts can also be an extreme disadvantage. Your audience don't want to spend their time following you around. And do remember, those of you who are good and those of you who are taking subjects which are going to be of public interest, someday, sometime, you'll have television cameras, not just our friend with the video there, sitting out there. And if television cameras are there and you're using your hands too much, you're not using your expression enough, you're going walkabouts, you're jingling coins in your pocket, it doesn't go down well. But overall, congratulations everybody. It was a marvelous morning's entertainment and education. Thank you.
A clear plan to either inform, entertain, or persuade, and there were many conversations that we would have wished to continue much beyond the 2-minute limitation on questions. I'd also like to add that one of the things that we were alerted to was the question of command of English, and the fact that shouldn't really be something that played a large role in our deliberations. I kept waiting for somebody with difficulty with English to appear, and it didn't happen. I was tremendously impressed with the level of attainment in terms of English, in terms of the structure of the speeches, in terms of the poise that all of you displayed. It was really a great pleasure for all of us. I thank you very much, and I thank the English-Speaking Union for having us as judges.
But we would love to have seen you there this afternoon. But for the three that are, our friend from Romania, who made a tremendous presentation, we thought, about her country, Oana Silvescu. Perhaps from my point of view, you had the advantage that I was actually in your country just before Christmas, and I did in fact have the chance to see some of the things you were talking about, but we both felt that you did an extremely good job. Leslie Ward from Scotland. And Ahmed Mehryar Ghazali from Pakistan.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the part of the afternoon where the judges have finally completed their onerous task. They have deliberated and cogitated, I hope, and I know they've got a few words to say and will then announce the winners. Okay, so I'll hand over to our judges.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the moment that everyone hates, including the judges, because you're not really interested in what we're saying at all. But I'd like you to take away a few thoughts in thanks from us to you for giving us an afternoon this afternoon, which was very, very valuable and very, very enjoyable. What I'd like to do is call on each of my colleagues, Elizabeth Mardell and Howard Shaw, to speak in general terms about what we heard, and then in not too many minutes, ladies and gentlemen, we will announce the result of this afternoon's competition. Elizabeth Mardell first.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you for an extremely enjoyable afternoon. I thought you were extraordinarily impressive. I do congratulate you. At your age, I think I would have run screaming from the room at the very thought of having to address so many people. Some of you I know have come from very far away, and I congratulate you on your courage and your fluency and your eloquence. I thought it was an extremely interesting afternoon. Your presentation was excellent, we thought. You spoke clearly, and you were interesting. You had some very vivid images. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to eat summer pudding without thinking about hysterectomies. I'm still confused and perplexed, and I shall probably be absorbed for the next few days in how you calculate, is it 30 million Turks from 100? History would be very different if your calculations were followed through. So, very well presented, interesting ideas. I think the only thing I would say, coming from radio, from World Service Radio, is I would have liked to hear a little bit more variety, a little bit more, perhaps, controversy in the themes. I think some of the subjects you took were less provocative than you could have been. After all, at your age, you're in a position where you have the opportunity to change the world. And I would very much recommend you to seize that chance, to express your radical ideas and give people like me a big shock. Thank you very much.
Well, I too would like to add my congratulations to all those who spoke this afternoon. I thought it was a staggeringly competent performance. It really was. And the business of judging was incredibly difficult. One might say that even those who have not come in the first three, there are many, many there who could easily have won the prize. I think that the thing, as one who works with young people for most of the time, that struck me most was the tremendous confidence of all of you when you were speaking. Unlike me now, as I fumbled my notes and wonder what I'm going to say next, it seemed to me that even when you did need a slight aide-memoire, you were actually totally confident, you knew what you were doing, and I thought that was tremendously good. Particularly, I was impressed when the doors opened and there were noises off, and various of the competitors took the whole thing in their stride as though nothing had happened at all, and I thought that too was very impressive. We had some excellent humour. We had, I thought, some moments of real poetry, where what was being said was in tune with the voice, of the rhythm and the gestures of the person who was speaking, and I thought that again came on tremendously well. Above all, it was good to see people avoiding those repetitive gestures, which can be so easy when you have to stand up in front of people and you're trying to make a point. In essence, though, it seemed to me when we were doing the judging that what I was perhaps looking for was the person who perhaps best developed a relationship with his audience and making the audience wonder what was coming next, conjuring up those pictures in the mind's eye which kept the listener with his ear just wondering. And so in a sense, for those who were actually doing the speaking, it was a performance. But the best ones were those for whom the audience felt that it wasn't a performance, that it really was the real thing, because that relationship had been developed. I thought it was a splendid afternoon and a remarkably high standard, and thank you very much for the pleasure you've given me.
And just a couple of final comments. Thank you again. Please remember that although this was one day of a competition in a public speaking event organised for a number of years now by the English Speaking Union, the things that we have heard and the things that you have done will be an important part of your lives and our lives for always. For every minute in business, in bringing up a family and having a life, is either proving or persuading or informing or entertaining. And you've all done each of those today, and we thank you for that. That is the end of the platitudes, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the result. We're in trouble with the administrators, I'm afraid. Rather than having a first, second and third, we have awarded a joint second place to two people and nominated a winner of the overall competition. It is my pleasure and pride to say that the two people in the running-up position, the joint seconds, in order of speaking this afternoon, are Muniza Zaidi and Sophie Enion. Sorry? Muniza from Pakistan and Sophie from Scotland. No favouritism, I promise. And the judges unanimous and happy choice for the winner of today's competition is Victoria Curl of Belgium.
Ladies and gentlemen, it now gives me great pleasure to introduce Lady Brigstock, the chairman of the English-Speaking Union, to present the first prize and the joint second prize this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before I hand them out, could I say about 3 words? First of all, to thank, on your behalf, the people who were clearly outstanding judges themselves, from what I've just heard. So can we give them a really good thank you? And really, all I wanted to say was how irritated and annoyed I am that I couldn't hear you this afternoon. And I think it is one of the most important projects that we could possibly have in the English-Speaking Union. And I speak now as chairman of the English-Speaking Union of the Commonwealth, deputy chairman of ESU Worldwide, and I'm soon to become chairman of ESU Worldwide. And this is what we really care about, to bring people together from all over the world and to see you operating in English. And as I understand, quite a few friendships and so on have happened during the few days you've been here. And I further understand that you have yourselves been so helpful because you've already given lots of ideas of how we can improve the whole thing in the future. And I assure you we'll try. Now, on to the important thing, the first prize. And I must get her name absolutely right. I've got it all here. It's Victoria Curl. So Victoria... And it's the only picture in existence that I know of that shows the full scope of London before the Great Fire in 1666. So it's rather a special picture on its own. Anyway, so that's the London that Shakespeare would have known. Many congratulations. I've suggested, being a former headmistress, that we'll do this in alphabetical order. So, Sophie Enion, please. order.
Thank you very much.
And the second prize? Yes. Just say it again. Muniza Zaidi.
We also have a prize for the other 6 members of the final, and so I'd like to invite the Director General of the English Speaking Union, Mrs. Valerie Mitchell, to come and present those prizes.
Ladies and gentlemen participants, I have already spoken this morning, and there is something about overexposure, so I shan't go into it again, but I would like to say how thrilled I am to hear that it has been such an outstanding success, and to congratulate all of you once again for participating and making this such a special international final for the English-speaking Union.
Okay, so Ahmed Mehryar Ghazali. Christopher Horrell from Australia. Ashwin Ramasubramaniam from India. Gautam Regge, also from India. Oana Savescu from Romania. And Leslie Ward from Scotland.
Last, I'm so glad we were able to say goodbye personally like that to everybody. Every single person has played a very special role in the last 3 days. And I know that I personally have enjoyed every single minute of it, and I get an awful inclination that all of you have done the same. Thank you so much, all of you, for coming.
Well,